Much to discuss about what's going on in our fair state. I think we'll start with some good news because most of the rest is not great news. The good news is that the battle's been joined and there is a fight happening in Springfield, a productive fight happening in Springfield, not a fight for fighting's sake, but a fight because of policy differences, policy disagreements. Disagreements over whether or not 2 + 2 does indeed equal 4. And so these are the kind of fights that we've been kind of spoiling for a long time, and they're really important. So that's the good news. The bad news is that our side is woefully outnumbered. I know we've had this conversation before, but before I even get into some of the policy discussion in terms of what's going on, let me just say again about the importance of politics. Everything we talk about this evening, I'm sure Art will reiterate this if he hasn't already said it. Everything we talk about this evening, we can go round and round and round about, and if we don't win more elections, it's just very difficult to move the flag in the direction of free minds and free markets and responsible government. It's just very difficult because there are those, many of whom come from Chicago, who are interested in a very different direction for the state, the direction that we've been on for the last 25, 35, 45 years. You know, you don't amass the kind of debt load that we have amassed overnight. It takes bipartisan cooperation to do that, and that's what we've had over that time period. But in terms of the political note, just remember these two numbers again. I think when I spoke at the Lincoln Day Dinner a couple months back, I mentioned these, but they bear repeating: 20 and 10. 20 and 10. There are 20 state House districts and 10 state Senate districts that Bruce Rauner won in November of last year that are currently held by Democrats. So yes, we're in the super minority in both the House and the Senate, but those two numbers speak to the opportunity that exists throughout Illinois. This is not Massachusetts, it's not Oregon, it's not California. This is not the deep blue state that Chicago Democrats would like you to believe it is. And you don't have to kind of listen to the arguments back and forth, just look at the numbers. There were a lot of people in 2014 who decided to do something maybe they haven't done before, when it came, at least when it came to voting for governor. And we've seen this happen all the time. In 2008, a whole bunch of people voted for Barack Obama, who in 2010 voted for congressional Republican candidates. Otherwise, Republicans wouldn't have taken back the House. A bunch of people that voted for President Obama in 2012 voted for Senate Republicans in 2014. Otherwise, Republicans wouldn't have taken the Senate. So the idea that the electorate is this static, amorphous body, and there's only, kind of so much we can do to move them in one direction or the other is just given lied to by the facts, by election results. And so the same thing can happen here. I will remind you, just for a little historical perspective at the state level, when Mitch Daniels won the governorship for the first time in Indiana back in '02, that had been a 16-year drought for Republicans in Indiana. He entered the governor's mansion in Indiana with super minorities in both the House and the Senate. And a decade later, they had taken control of their state legislature, both chambers, and Mitch Daniels handed off an unbelievable turnaround to Mike Pence. So it can happen. Is it a light switch? Is it going to happen overnight? No. But we need one seat, pick up one seat in the state house to get out of the super minority. That makes a big difference. One seat. And it's eminently doable. 20 state house seats that Bruce Rauner won that are occupied by Democrats right now. In the Senate, honestly, it's going to be a little bit tougher to move the needle as quickly. There are fewer seats, they're more expensive, they're tougher incumbents in many respects. There's not as many truly vulnerable incumbents as there are in the House. But we can move the needle in the Senate too, so that over the course of the next couple cycles, again, this is not going to happen overnight, but over the course of the next couple cycles, leading into the remap of 2020, we can be in a position, if we're not on the cusp of taking control of both chambers, then the remap, so long as we continue to maintain control of the governor's office, can set us up to do precisely that. All these things are doable. Do not buy into the kind of fatalism that sometimes afflicts the conservative movement, the Republican Party. You know, there's lost the will to live. There's no reason. We can never beat Mike Madigan. He's a mythical figure. He's just a biblical monster. It's nice to say like a property tax attorney for Chicago. That's all it is. I mean, honestly, John Cullerton, just another kind of mediocre attorney from Chicago. These guys are not indomitable figures. They have just done a better job playing the game of politics, particularly electoral politics, than we have over the last 10 years in particular. So it's doable. Now, why it's so important, if you want to continue to be an Illinois resident, is the numbers we're facing and the implications of those numbers. $214 billion in debt, $30 billion in assets. That's what Illinois has. $214 billion in debt and $30 billion in assets. This is according to Truth in Accounting, which is a nonpartisan think tank that promotes transparency in government. So that kind of 7-to-1 debt load, big problem, big problem. And buried in that $214 billion in debt, of course, is the real driver. I mean, it's not the only one, but it's substantial, and that's public sector pensions. And after the recent Illinois State Supreme Court decision, we have got to go back to the drawing board and refigure how we're going to address the 5 state pension systems that are the worst funded in the nation and that are really driving Illinois' worst credit rating in the nation. And this is where the hand-to-hand combat starts. Because you have a lot of people that are good people and that work in the public sector. There's nothing wrong with working in municipal government, state government. I worked in municipal government. I've worked in state government. I'm a great human being. So just because you work in government doesn't mean you're a bad person. You know, people work in government just like people work in the private sector. It's a mixed bag. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, so I don't go around vilifying anybody for working in the public sector. And I don't begrudge people who say, well, this was the deal that was presented to me. I agreed to it. I held up my end. The state, the municipality should hold up their end. That's reasonable. I agree with that. Unfortunately, it was a bad deal, but just because the state made a bad deal doesn't mean that the person who worked a lifetime and relied on those benefits to be conferred for their retirement isn't entitled to it. I think they are, and I think we should pay them what they earn. And I think we can bend the cost curve and still keep our moral obligations to people who have earned benefits. The challenge is trying to get some percentage of the public sector unions to engage constructively in this conversation about math. And let me just say this, they all know it. They all know the deal. It's just some of them are intransigent. Some of them don't care. Some of them would have us burn this state down if it was required to continue this deal that we have with public sector unions that we have proven. This isn't a matter of opinion. We have proven we cannot finance it. And we have proven that the state of Illinois shouldn't be in charge of pension funds because clearly the state is a bad manager of other people's money. I mean, this apparently is news to people. I don't really understand how, but I don't know why people are so excited about having the state in charge of their pensions. Worst funded pensions in the country, lowest credit rating driven by the worst funded pensions. And by the way, and this is where I think there's some opportunity, if you are a public sector worker that is 45 years old or younger, and you are looking forward to retiring in 15 years or so, and you think that the benefits that have been promised to you to date are going to be there when you retire if we don't do anything, if we stay on this trajectory, you're going to be one of those people who receives IOUs in the mail instead of checks. And I don't want that to happen to people. This is the funny thing about it. There's so many conversations in forums like this and with public sector unions. I recently did one in Bourbonnais. There was a strong contingent of AFSCME members there who ultimately walked out about halfway through my remarks because they couldn't, their delicate ears could no longer listen to the math. But this is the funny thing, is people on our side are trying to save their pensions, and they're not. I'll tell you what, I'm almost, at some point they're going to persuade me that I shouldn't care either. The problem is, I don't want to leave this up to the courts. because gosh only knows what the courts are going to do and the implications of those decisions. It could go a lot of different directions, and this is kind of what I try to convey, what I think we all need to convey to our friends in public sector unions or in the public sector workforce, is, look, you think that this very liberal interpretation of one clause in the Constitution says nothing can change forever and ever until rapture. That is a silly interpretation of the Constitution. The Supreme Court is wrong. The idea that you cannot change benefits that have not yet been earned for employees that don't even yet exist is just, it runs afoul of logic. But that's kind of where we're at, and this is the opinion that you're hearing back from a lot of the public sector unions, at least at the leadership level. But here's the thing, and this goes back to them too. Do you want to roll the dice? Do you want to roll the dice with your pension? Do you want to roll the dice with your livelihood? I don't want you to have to. But if you think people are just going to sit around and be punished, then you haven't been watching what's going on in Illinois for the last 15 years, where one Illinoisan has left this state every 10 minutes for the last 15 years. We have net lost $30 billion in gross domestic product that could have gone to things like financing schools and providing quality services to persons that truly are vulnerable and need those services and all kinds of other stuff. Now people are being productive in other states that are providing those services, that are funding their schools, and so forth. But if you think people are just going to sit around and get punished, not only will they flee to other states where they can enjoy a better quality of life at a lower cost, you're also going to have people that make novel arguments in a court of law. For example, oh, yes, that's true that there's no provision in the federal bankruptcy code for a state to go bankrupt. But perhaps we could get a judge to take the view that while a state cannot go bankrupt, perhaps the 5 state pension funds are not technically the state. And perhaps they could go bankrupt when they run out of money. That's a different thing altogether, isn't it? And these are the kinds of decisions that bankruptcy judges, federal district court judges, receivers, when you're talking about these difficulties at the municipal level, and there are serious difficulties at the municipal level as well, it's not just Chicago. These are the kind of decisions that are going to have to be made because the math is inexorable. $214 billion in debt, $30 billion in assets. 1 of every 4 state tax dollars right now going to fund pensions. And you can't keep up. We had a 17% return on our state pension funds last year when the market was good. It's a pretty good return, 17%. And the amount of unfunded liabilities went up. Doesn't matter what you do, you cannot make the math work with where we're at. And I think one of the challenges that we have is to get past all of the arguments that are misdirection plays, all of the arguments that are white noise, and get to this conversation with people who have an interest, because they're the most motivated ones, about what we do now, what we do going forward. I understand that the politicians short-funded the pensions and they lied and cheated. Fine. Agreed. I can concede the point. We cannot go get into our DeLorean and go back to 1986 and tell Jim Thompson to make a different decision. Or go back to 1994 and tell Jim Edgar to make a different decision. Or George Ryan, or Rod Blagojevich, or Pat Quinn. We can't do it. So what do you do with the reality on the ground now? That's the conversation very few people that have the honorable in front of their name want to have, very few people that are the leaders of public sector unions want to have, and frankly, a lot of rank and file members of those public sector unions want to have. And it's the conversation we have to drive. People lied to you and cheated you. Join the fracking club. That's happened to 13 million people for the better part of a half century. We're all in it together. And for those of us staying, who are lashed to the mast, like me, I'm not going to leave, because they should leave if anybody's going to leave. They're the ones who messed it all up. I want to stay. So if we're going to stay, and we're going to fight, and we're going to figure this out, then we're going to have to concede some things up front so we can get to the crux of the matter. I think that's some of what Bruce Rauner is trying to do. I think it's very difficult to do that, as I said, with the political balance of power in Springfield. But you know how people's opinions change and policy moves. It is not a light switch. You change the conversation that informs people's previously uninformed or fact-free opinions with new information that they may contemplate, at least some of them. And so new information to inform their opinion changes how they understand what's going on, and maybe that changes their decision on election day. And they make different choices on election day, which gives us different political leaders who then go to Springfield and make different policy choices. It's a continuum. And that continuum starts right now as we're, 10 months from a primary and a year and a half from a general election. That's the conversation we have to drive. We have to find, as you guys have always done, find and adopt good state legislative candidates and go to the wall for them. That's what we're going to try and do with the PAC that I run. That's what Bruce Rauner is going to try and do with the PAC that he created. We're not going to lose because we don't have resources. We're not going to lose because we don't have candidates who are capable or working hard. We're going to win or lose based on the quality of articulating our vision, our message, who we are, and why we're here, and why we're doing what we're doing, and frankly, outworking the other side at the grassroots level. That's what has to happen if we're going to move the needle. And I mean, look, this starts right here with Frank Montino and how close Jerry Long came in 2014. Real opportunity. And by the way, thinking of the unthinkable, very few people, myself included, thought Jerry Long would come as close as he did to Montino. Everyone is vulnerable. No one's seat is their birthright. No one is indomitable. Everyone can be beaten, including Mike Madigan, including John Cullerton. And I think it's kind of our collective charge to do what we can within our circles of influence, within the limited time everyone has to volunteer for political activity, to really kind of laser in on those things that we need to be doing to maximize our impact individually and collectively. And that'll take questions or comments, personal attacks.
With Madigan's statement on we're passing a $2.5 billion shortfall budget.
Right.
We'll let the governor worry about it. What exactly is going to happen, in your opinion?
Well, there's a couple of dates that are coming up that are interesting. You kind of have to go beyond the horizon of the technical end of session. So June 30th, Chicago has a pension payment to make that they can't make to their police and fire pensions, and they want relief from Springfield. July 15th, if you don't do anything about that imbalance, you start to endanger the state's ability to send out paychecks. Think that'll get people's attention? I think some people will get some of their legislators' attention when the paychecks don't come, if the paychecks don't come in the mail. Think about when the state legislators did get their paychecks. All of a sudden, everybody got real focused. And then the third date is August 10th, which is the date that the first disbursement for general state aid for schools is to go out. So those dates, I think, are my prediction. This could change, but my prediction is those dates are going to inform some kind of bartering process between Madigan and Cullerton and Rauner. In the absence of that, because number one, I believe Rauner when he says, I'm not voting for, or I'm not going to sign any tax increase. Even something I've kind of previously indicated I would support, broadening of the sales tax to include services, not without structural reform of state government. And he's moved forward kind of six-pronged turnaround agenda, modified down, watered down, but still six prongs of it. So I assume and I believe that he is going to demand some movement towards structural reform of state government before he signs on to anything. What Madigan and Cullerton are trying to do is what they've always done to governors, Republican or Democrat, which is, you make the cuts. That's the same thing they did to Quinn. You make the cuts. Here it is. They care about the Constitution when it comes to an interpretation of the pension clause. They don't care about the state Constitution when it comes to passing a balanced budget. Somehow that clause of the Constitution doesn't apply. I'm not really sure why, but it just doesn't, because we pick and choose. But I mean, I think that's the game, is to push it back on Rauner. You make the draconian cuts. You try and cut $2 billion out of this budget.
In your opinion, who's going to get the blame when the checks don't get here?
Republicans.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Ronner is going to take on some water, but I think everyone's going to take on some water. And really, Ronner's, this is kind of like the conversation of when we talk about President Obama and the Republican Congress. You have to be willing to put in a fight. You have to be willing to make arguments. You have to be willing to leverage your bully pulpit. So why is it that when something bad happens at the federal level, we all assume Republicans in Congress are going to be blamed, not the President of the United States. And if something bad happens at the state level, we all assume the Republican governor is going to be blamed, not the Democrat Congress. I think it has less to do with the D's and the R's and more to do with the approach in those particular contexts. And so what I would say is that Ronner has a bully pulpit and a big checkbook, and he's already running some campaigns, some advertising campaigns now. They certainly advertise on our station about some of these topics, including property tax freeze. So I would say that there's no reason that he has to kind of sit back and be a pincushion, and there's no reason that he can't make a case that, look, I have been here 6 months. I think we've seen somebody at the federal level do a pretty good job of saying, I inherited a mess. This previous guy drove the economy into a ditch. Blah, blah. I mean, to some extent, I mean, it's a little bit of your own medicine. Look, these guys, Mike Madigan is the longest serving Speaker of the House in U.S. history. I've been here since January. So obviously this all didn't happen on my watch. These guys are intractable. They say, I mean, they're having press conferences to say we're going to pass an unbalanced budget. So if they are not going to be responsibly engage and abide their fiduciary duty, I'm going to force them to. And if the people of Illinois don't want their legislators to abide their fiduciary duty, don't want revenue to spending to not go beyond the revenue that is being generated, well then they can make their choice. They can pick their poison. They can decide that what's going on in Illinois right now is a good thing, but we know that people think Illinois is on the wrong track by about an 80-20 clip. So there's a lot of disaffection out there that Ronner can tap into if he makes good arguments, if he stands his ground, if he puts in the fight.
One more. What would you and the Illinois Opportunity Organization recommend to people like us to help provide education or at least a forum for either deflecting blame or perhaps directing it where it belongs?
Yeah, look, I mean, sometimes I think, oh my gosh, the state's so big, and you've got 118 reps and 59 senators, and and I'm just this person who lives over here, and I don't have time to do this 24/7 because I've got a job or I've got grandkids to worry about or whatever. Just think about being a ward boss essentially in Chicago. Control your vote. Inform your voters. Just think about your circle of influence, but be maybe a little bit more aggressive than sometimes people are willing to be about politics when you talk to your friends and neighbors and family members and co-parishioners and co-volunteers and guys on the golf course on Saturday afternoon. Raise the issue and inform people's fact-free opinions or misunderstood opinions about the reality on the ground and what needs to be done and who's trying to do something productive that's fair to everyone, who's trying to stand up to ruling class politicians in Springfield who've destroyed this state's finances, and who isn't. I mean, I think the multiplier effect of people doing that, there are 20, 40, 100 people within your circle, the multiplier effect of that can be substantial. I mean, there are a lot of state legislative races that come down to a few hundred votes. A lot of them. Most of those target races that I talked about are a few hundred votes. So think about if people like you in districts like Fontino's, for example, but districts around the state, we're just worried about people you already have a trust relationship with, and people that already know that you're involved in politics in a way that maybe they're not. You pay attention to this stuff. And so they are more inclined to listen to what you have to say and the research that you've done and the information that you've culled together than they are some guy from Chicago who blathers on the radio that they don't know, or some politician in Springfield that they don't know. I think we have to, sometimes we get too big and talk about big media campaigns and moving armies, kind of a mass movement effect, and how do we ignite a mass movement. Just focus on the granular level. Focus where you're comfortable. It can have a huge impact. And like I said, if just the people in this room did that, if you start to kind of do the math, I mean, you're talking about probably several thousand votes, at least in this room, that could be controlled, controlled in a good way.
Governor says we don't have money to build Chicago.
Correct. He's right.
My question is, why is it that we can give those people link cards and they can't be tested for drugs? If I go out tomorrow and look for a job, before they even think of hiring me, I have to be screened for drugs. So is it better that I go get a link card so I don't have to get a drug test? I'm trying to find out. I know the governor is going to get a little flack, and I'm going to do all I can to help her, because somehow they got to stand up some 2.5 billion people up there that got the handicap. So how can the governor say, okay, we got to feed you, we got to give you a home, but you got to have a drug test.
Yeah.
And you can't buy cigarettes, and you can't buy them big T-bone steaks. You can't buy big pork chops.
No law.
I believe it happened. I have nothing against helping, but I hate when somebody put their foot in my butt and say, I'm over this.
Right. No, look, I agree with you. People are tired of other people gaming the system at their expense. It's the same conversation about pensions, frankly. In terms of what the governor can do, and by the way, to your point, you see a lot of other states moving in exactly this direction. Missouri is, Kansas is, other states have already done so. Because it is a matter of equity. It's exactly what you said. We are a charitable nation. We don't let people starve in the streets in this country. We understand that sometimes people need a helping hand for a specified period of time. Fine, no problem. But when you see people pull up in a Mercedes S-Class to get lobster tail with their link card, people look a little cross-eyed at that, and I understand why. Yeah, they should. And so this has become a bit of a lifestyle, and this is a problem nationally. The welfare state is a problem nationally. It's a sad thing, and one of the ways I think we should convey this too is it's number one, it's unfair to people that are working and trying to struggle to get by. The median household income in the state is $50,000. At least according to the Cato Institute, if you access if you access something like 6 or 7 of the 24 federal anti-poverty programs, not even including what you can do at the state level. They did like a household, what that would calculate out to in different states, like household income. I think in Illinois it's something like $33,000. So now you're saying you can do nothing and get $33,000 worth of effective income. You can work your butt off 40 hours a week and make $50,000, which a lot of people are. And then you're also financing the guy who's doing nothing with $33,000 in benefits. So you can understand where people get riled up about it. But one of the things I would say about this too is think about this. We always have to talk about politics in human terms. Sometimes I think as conservatives we get bogged down in the numbers, particularly astronomical numbers that people have a hard time contemplating. Right? It's hard to derive meaning from that. The sadness of the welfare state, it's not just that it's financially crushing, it's that it's soul crushing. That it destroys my neighbor. So my neighbor can't recover from the perniciousness of the welfare state, can't be productive. And that's, it's a form of prison, frankly. Because as we understand, work is soul craft. Your job is not who you are, but work is endemic to being a productive human being, being a human being that has self-worth, no matter what work you do. And so to me, I think we should always look at these issues, yes, the finances and a certain kind of fairness, logic, sensibility type of argument, but also what's the human cost of this? I see something like you described, and I look at it and say, well, I feel terrible for that person. That person isn't getting, that person is deluding themselves. That person is running a scam on me, but the scam on me pales in comparison to the scam they're running on themselves. and the state is financing it. The state really is evil in terms of making people dependent, politicians that advance this welfare state. They're evil, they're immoral, because their desire is to make people dependent on them, to crush them. And I don't want my neighbor, my friend, somebody even I don't know, to be crushed. I want them to be productive. I think we kind of need, if you turn the angle of conversation just about 15 degrees, you have a very different conversation with people than just saying, you know, this welfare cheat over here, tell them to go pound sand. I can't afford lobster tail, they can, you know, go down to the food pantry. I don't think that's a productive conversation for us. And I think if you, just like I said, change the angle of incidents, you have a very different conversation. Because remember, we're trying to persuade people that are not necessarily inclined to go our way, or don't maybe necessarily haven't been exposed to the ideas we've been exposed to, or frankly, maybe don't have the same logical capacity that we do. But we still got to persuade them, because it's one man, one vote. So we need to. We have got to bring, we got to Red Rover people to our side. And so that, you know, so that means thinking creatively about how we message to them. Don't just harangue them. It's tempting. And you can use people, some people as examples. I used ASME as an example of this forum last week, and it was really enjoyable. But I wouldn't suggest that as kind of the model of engagement all the time.
I think it was, or something like that, and pat himself on the back and said, look how good we did. Back to what this gentleman said earlier about Bruce Rauner not bailing out Chicago, because Ron Emanuel, I believe, did that knowing full well that he could shove that down to Springfield, and Pat Quinn and the Democrats would cover that. I was encouraged to hear Bruce Rauner say that he's not going to bail out Chicago. But the question I have is, there was, a while back, there was legislation going through to where the individual municipalities can file bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Where are we at on that?
It's pending.
It is still
Yeah,
pending.
that's one of the 6 prongs of Rauner's modified turnaround agenda, is a municipal bankruptcy provision. So it's pending in Springfield. I wouldn't expect it to pass.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, I mean, you have a pension contagion that's out there. And they're in a very short order, there are going to be a lot of people that wake up to a big surprise. I mean, Chicago, their police and fire pensions are less than 30% funded, which is a death spiral. It's dead. I mean, it's really, I mean, you really, I don't know how you pull yourself out of that spiral. But it's not just Chicago. There are a lot of communities, including very wealthy communities in places you would never think, that have the same unfunded liability problem with their police and fire pensions, specifically. Public works too, but police and fire specifically. If this just goes again to say, it is stunning to me the lack of urgency that people in elective office at the state level have for the financial problems that we face. They are very real. They are imminent. I mean, could it be a few years? It could be a few years. It could be a few years. Not more than that. I mean, these are just actuarial tables. This isn't Republican, Democrat. It's just math. And you just have people that are unwilling to confront the reality. It's kind of one of those things where until it crashes, you know, we're just going to steady as she goes, and maybe we'll be, you know, maybe Christ will descend from on high and multiply our municipal finances. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's a good strategy, but it seems to be that that's what a lot of people think is possible, or that's what they're hoping will happen. They're looking for a miracle, and by the way, so I feel bad for police and fire, for example. I don't want policemen or firefighters to not get paid. I don't want them to not get their pension. So I feel bad for them. Teachers, the same thing. And I feel bad for taxpayers, because then you're going to have the real conversation where everybody gets hammered, like in Detroit, where everybody gets hammered, bondholders take a haircut, pensioners take a haircut, taxpayers who are left get hammered or flee before they get hammered. It's just a mess. It is a mess. And it's one of those things that we all know, and we all learned in grade school. The longer you take to address a problem you know exists, the more painful the solution to that problem is going to have to be.
Well, another part of that question is
And that's another one of the reform proposals, right?
At the last meeting, the Democrat who's been elected to run the county board brought several business agents in from private sector unions.
Right.
And attempted to bully everybody into passing a no vote.
Correct, right, sure.
And fortunately, we had enough Republicans, we've got a majority, to at least get it tabled so they could have more discussion. But I've been told by reliable sources that several Republicans are going to vote against it, which will do away with our majority, so to speak. I just wondered if you could speak to that, in case everybody here can be. From what they tell me, the next county board meeting is going to be very well attended by union people.
Yeah, these county board meetings or local municipal meetings where they've taken up some version of the right to work zone resolution. Yeah, this is the challenge we have as public choice economists will tell you, public choice theory economists, the problem of concentrated benefits and diffuse costs. So the benefits are concentrated with the public sector unions and the unions more generally, and so they show up. The costs are spread among all of us, and so, you know, we're generally speaking, your average Joe citizen is less likely to show up because, you know, this is not his livelihood on the line, or it's not perceived to be his livelihood on the line, which is more accurate. But for the unions, it is. And right to work is, you know, the Maginot Line for them. So you can expect them to show up and continue to show up and watch the calendar. And you're going to have to decide, your board members are going to have to decide if their vote is going to be determined based on the substance of the policy proposal before them, or, you know, who yells the loudest, or who looks the meanest sitting in the gallery. I don't know. You know, different people make different choices in those moments of truth. So I guess that's going to be up to your board members. The right to work thing, I will say this though. Right to work is not going to be the reality in Illinois anytime soon. I mean, that's just the truth. So I figure I might as well tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And frankly, I don't think the ground has been made fertile enough for the right to work zones. And this is why you're having problems, or Bronner's having problems, we're having problems, even in communities that are Republican controlled, even in communities with boards who understand that right to work does not mean diminishing wages necessarily. Right to work does not mean the end of collective bargaining rights. Right to work doesn't mean a lot of the things that the public sector unions in particular say it means. And, you know, this isn't like some kind of crazy laboratory experiment that nobody's tried. 26 states have right to work laws, so I mean, more than half the country. And by the way, you should take a look at those 26 states and compare their economic performance to the 24 states that don't. It's instructive. So that's kind of what I have to say about that. I don't, you know, I don't know how your board's going to go. I don't know your board well enough to predict that, but this is something that's happening around the state as these right-to-work resolutions are being advanced in the, frankly, few places that they're being advanced, relatively speaking, relative to the number of local units of government we have. Another problem in Illinois, 7,000 local units of government, more than any state in the nation by a wide measure. Pennsylvania, I think, is second. They have 2,000 fewer than us. Taxing body, layers and layers and layers of government expense.